My mum died quite suddenly and unexpectedly of a hospital infection about 4 months ago, but that, if you can believe it, wasn't the worst thing. Nor was the fact that her younger sister, my aunt, took up with Dad less than 2 months after her death. The worst was yet to come. It started on a dull evening. I just had supper with my aunt and Dad, barely tolerating her bright, friendly chatter about school. I went upstairs to my room as soon as I could to do my homework. I stared at my laptop screen, pretending to look at my assignment, but in reality I was swimming in grief and missing Mum. I couldn't concentrate on anything since she died. I minimized the assignment tab and looked at the photo I used as background. It was taken a few years ago, a happy family occasion, my mum and aunt sitting side by side, so like yet unlike my dad next to Mum, and I was leaning against him. All of us were smiling. Mum had both her arms stretched out around her sister and her husband. The chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen began flashing. I was mildly surprised. It was an older app that no one really used anymore. I had been meaning to delete it, and then I froze. Mum's little image blinked in the chat box, and then the words popped up. "Hello Thelma, it's me, Mum." Fear gripped my throat. I knew it must be some hacking thing or stupid error, but I was paralyzed. I turned round and glanced at my bedroom door. It was closed, although the sounds of TV from the living room still came wafting in. Aunt Claudia had the TV on whenever she was downstairs, even if she was not watching it. "Don't be scared, Thelma. It's really me. I found a way to talk to you, my darling, precious child. I've been missing you so much." If this was a hacker's joke, it was the cruelest joke in the world. Against my will, tears began welling in my eyes, spilling out. "Oh, my darling, please don't cry. It's okay. And it's no use crying anyway. I need you to save that energy." My fingers still stiff from fear, I managed to type out a response. "Mum, what do you mean? Is that you?" I could sense her familiar frustration rushing back through the laptop, same as when she felt I wasn't being smart or strong enough when she was alive. "Of course, Thelma, it's me, and I've come back to tell you something important." I had my own important news to share. "Did you know Aunt Claudia moved in last weekend?" "Yes, Thelma, I know. And this is what gave me the strength to come and tell you. Please be strong. I know you are a strong girl, and you can deal with this. I am sorry you have to, but you have to know. I have to tell you. She can't have everything, my life, man, house, child." A different kind of fear took over me. "Mum, what do you mean?" "Thelma, I'm sorry to put this on you like this. I don't know what else to do. You have to know. Aunt Claudia murdered me." The bottom of my world gave way as I dropped into a dark hole of dread and fear. I felt as if I had known this all along, all through the past 4 months, ever since that awful night when Aunt Claudia called from the hospital where she worked to talk to Dad. I just couldn't say it. "Thelma, are you listening to me?" If I had any doubts that the laptop chat was really my mum, those words dispelled them. I heard them in the exact voice she always used to say those very words to me. "Yes, Mum, but how?" "She was at the hospital, you know, when I went in. She wasn't on my floor, but it was very easy for her to arrange for me to pick up an infection." "Thelma," the door opened and Aunt Claudia poked her head in. I gave a little scream and frantically minimized the chat box. Aunt Claudia stepped forward. "Oh, honey, you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you okay?" Wordlessly, I nodded. Aunt Claudia sighed. "Thelma, sweetheart, I miss your mom too, but this moping isn't doing you any good. It's hurting your dad, you know. Do you want him to suffer more?" I shrugged. I couldn't speak. I looked up at her. The light was odd on her face. She looked more like Mum than ever before, but also not. "And these clothes, Thelma." She reached out and touched my black sleeve, and I flinched back as though she had hit me. She frowned, and for an instant I thought she was actually going to slap me. But then she smiled and said, "I know girls your age like to wear black all over, but what do you say, me? And you have a trip to the mall and pick you up some nice new gear on me. Come on, sweetheart, it will be so much fun." I shook my head furiously. Tears of rage, grief and fear splatter out. Aunt Claudia began again. "Oh, Thelma." But then she stopped and went quiet. I looked up at her face. She was pale and had a horrible expression. She was staring at my laptop. I followed her line of sight, turning around to look at my screen. The photo had changed. There was a new photo in background showing Mum seemingly asleep in a hospital bed, and Aunt Claudia by her side, bent over her. Aunt Claudia seemed to jolt into life. Her face twisted into a terrible snarl. She screamed, "Are you playing tricks on me?" And she lunged towards me. I cringed back in my chair, raising my hands to defend myself against her onslaught. But before she could even touch me, a bolt of electricity sprang out of the laptop, hit her square in the chest, and she dropped dead to the floor. I shrieked in terror. Dad and I had to move from that town. Losing 2 wives in 4 months isn't a good look for anyone. Even though the police combed through our statements and the laptop and the electricity up and down, they eventually had to put it down to a freak accident which happened when I asked my aunt for help to get my laptop working. Dad never remarried, and I never heard from Mum again. My little brother, Aidan, was 4 when we found out he'd never be able to talk. I could tell my mum was always concerned, but the panic only really set in when Aidan turned 3. She took him to every doctor in the country, and not a single person had an answer for her. There was nothing medical about it. He just didn't talk. He never cried when he was a baby, even when he was born. He never looked like he wanted to say anything, and he only opened his mouth when he had to eat. Aidan wasn't shy. He would make eye contact, and he would watch you even if you weren't looking. My mum decided to homeschool Aidan until he could speak, and my dad didn't really have an opinion. Most of their time was spent studying the Bible. My mum tried teaching him basic math, science, history, but she was in no place to be teaching anything. Her whole life she lived on a farm with her father. She didn't receive any higher education. She didn't even graduate high school. But that didn't really matter to her. As long as she served the Lord as a good Catholic woman, the rest would take care of itself. Aidan liked taking my stuff. He liked taking my records and anything electronic. Eventually it got so bad I started keeping everything in a safe under my bed. When I asked him, he wouldn't admit to anything. He did it to my parents too, though it took them longer to figure out. Once they did, my dad put Aidan over his knee and belted him until he bled. Yet he never let out a squeal, cry, or whimper. He always took his punishment in silence. He was my little brother, so I loved him, I guess, but I was so much older. Could I really love someone I've never talked to? Much less someone who steals everything I buy. I didn't know what to make of Aidan. I never looked at him. Even when I knew he was looking at me, it made the smallest things really hard, to the point where it pissed me off. Why did I have to feel so uncomfortable every night at dinner? I knew it probably wasn't his fault, but it was affecting my relationship with my parents. The house was bent around the elephant every single day. Everything was about him, no matter how hard we tried to move on, and it wasn't going to change. Although it had never come out of mouth, I only knew one thing. I wished my brother was gone. One Sunday at church, everyone settled in their pews, and it was pretty crowded that day. The service was long and boring, per usual. Looking at the clock made things worse. But after the service was over, Aidan handed my mum a note with a big word written in chicken scratch. Confession. My mum's face was grey. She showed my dad, and he didn't make much of it. He whispered something to my mum, then took Aidan's hand and walked him to a few members of the clergy at the altar. My mum told me what Dad said to her. He said, There'd be a chance Aidan might talk, and I didn't know what to think. One of the ministers jovially walked Aidan to a booth. What could a 4-year-old have possibly done to warrant a confession of sin? The thought made the priest laugh as they entered the booth. The two stayed inside for a long time. After 5 minutes, I was starting to get concerned. After 10 minutes, my dad suggested pulling him out. Then, after about 15 minutes, they finished. Aidan walked out of the booth and blissfully strolled over to hug my mom's leg. Next came the priest. His face was ghost white. His miserable eyes held his tears. He was lost in his own mind. We watched as he rejoined the clergy, and I saw the men address him, but he wouldn't respond. He couldn't talk.
This is the absolute disturbing experience had with my friend. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah and I went for vacation, and thus the two for us to this Airbnb apartment in a calm neighborhood. We were exploring the place. It was cool, we liked it cozy and all. We unpacked our baggages, freshened up, and went outside to explore the areas. We went back at 11 p.m. and immediately we felt something odd. I can guarantee my life I left the living room's lights off. It was on. Okay, no worries, Sarah was just telling me you probably forgot or something. I brushed it off and not talking it as big of deal at first. I thought probably the owner came in. But anyways, we went to the kitchen to make dinner while talking about Sarah's deceased boyfriend and how much she misses him and all. Liam, her deceased boyfriend, he was a genuine nice guy, have nothing bad to say about him. We had our dinner while watching Conjuring 2. In bed, we kept hearing some loud banging at 2:30 a.m. from neighbors. It was really hard for us to have a good night's sleep because of the noises, but we managed to sleep anyways. Suddenly, Sarah's phone started ringing. Who's calling at this time? I said to Sarah. I looked at her. She was pale like she saw a ghost. Asked her what was wrong. She received a text from Liam, her deceased boyfriend, saying, "I miss you." What kind of sick joke is that? Of course, she tried to answer, asking who's this and why they're using Liam's phone. No answer. We kind of lost sleep. It was 4 a.m. Sarah was still spamming the number and calling NFC straight to the voicemail. I kept feeling some strange vibe, like someone is watching us or something. I didn't feel comfortable. Then she received another text, "Help me, it's cold and dark down there." I honestly was shitting my pants. Sarah, on the other hand, was furious that someone plays with her emotions that way. And then she kept receiving texts that only them know about and some weird disturbing pictures. Got a phone call from him. She picked it up. She can only hear some sort of breathing. It was really weird. After that night, we kept having some unexplained things. Like every time we go out and come back, we find things misplaced, like lights on our stuff missing, and Liam's phone is on. All of these things were really disturbing for me. Can anyone explain? Well, that's this. Is it really her boyfriend trying to text her from the other side? I don't even think that's possible. Misplaced stuff, etc. Does anyone have an explanation for this? Consider yourself lucky if you've never been woken up by a tornado alarm. 1 minute you're in a deep sleep, dreaming about a better world, and the next, you're being confronted with a waking nightmare. When those alarms go off, you only have a few minutes to wake from your stupid, gather your family and get to a safe space. The twister could be down the street or across town. You won't know until it either blows your house down or enough time passes that you feel confident it missed you. In the meantime, you and yours huddle in a closet or a cellar and pray. It's a hazard I've lived with for most of my life. When you grow up in a part of the country colorfully named Tornado Alley, you learn to live with the storms. I've been lucky that one hasn't destroyed my house, but I've had a few close shaves. If you've ever seen the power of a massive funnel cloud, up close, it never leaves your brain. Watching the natural world destroy nearly indestructible buildings is a fun reminder that Mother Nature is our landlord, and people are just the residents on this planet. We can be evicted at any moment. The screeching alarms are as much a part of summer as the crack of a bat and the buzzing of cicadas. They help make up the milieu of Midwest living. The alarm systems are automated, and they go off when conditions indicate a potential storm. Even if there isn't a twister, the alarms are a signal that something terrible is approaching. It could be a pounding hailstorm, a weird green sky, or flooding from intense and ceaseless rainfall. Regardless if the alarms are blaring, some bad shit is coming your way. This time was worse than all those other times combined. My day had been a pleasant one. The weather was warm, so we spent the day playing in the yard and taking a dip in our pool. It's an above-ground number that we got at a discount, but the water was cool and that's all that mattered. My littlest is still learning, and my eldest loves to jump in, so it was a balancing act, trying to get both sides to work together. It can be frustrating, but these micro-negotiations, with the purview of parenting, commies with the turf. As afternoon turned into evening, Cindy, my wife, played soccer with the kids while I cooked some burgers on the grill and enjoyed a drink or two. The weather was so perfect, we ate outside under our spreading oak tree. My son left his scraps for the ants, and I was sure the amount of food he left would fill the ants' storage quota for the summer. After the sun went down and we put the kids to bed, Cindy and I lay in our hammock, watching the stars and talking about nothing and everything. It's an odd way to think about it, but it was one of those days you'll think about on your deathbed. A moment in time you'll lovingly return to when you're about to cross into the next life. It will bring a smile to your face at a time when that should seem impossible. We went to bed a few hours later. The temperature had cooled, and there was a slight breeze blowing. Still, there was absolutely no indication of storms on the horizon. When you're in an area where it rains frequently, you can develop a sixth sense of when a storm is coming. You can feel subtle changes in your body. If a distant storm is intense enough, you can smell the petrichor in the air. The smell of dry dirt mingling with rainwater lets you know what kind of hell is coming. But there was none of that. We slept with everything as calm as possible in this rolling modern world. The perfect capstone to the perfect day, one for the ages. Then the tornado siren started blaring. When you become a parent, any thought of being a deep sleeper goes out the window. Nature takes away your ability to sleep deeply when you have to take care of little ones, that said. The alarm was loud enough to wake the dead. I sat up in an instant, my eyes open, but the fuzz of the dream world still clouded the edges of my vision. Tornado, Cindy asked, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. I think so, I'll grab the kids, I said, swinging my legs out of bed. Before I could hit the door, I heard the running of two little bodies down the hallway. The sirens had also brought the kids in from the land of Nod. They both were scared, and you could see the fear in their tiny faces. They both ran past me and hopped under the blankets with my wife. I grabbed my phone and looked for an alert from the National Weather Service, but there was nothing. I did a Google search for tornado warnings in my area and came up with the same. I hauled my body out of bed and walked to the backslider. I didn't see any rain falling. I opened the door and confirmed there wasn't even a distant rumble of thunder. But that alarm was steady. It would rise in turn and decibels, and then fall again before starting over. If you listened closely, you could hear the different alarms going off further away. It was like they were singing the world's most annoying song in the round. I closed the door and walked back into my bedroom. Cindy was getting the gear ready to go into our shelter when I said to stop. She was confused why, quote, "There isn't any storm, what, quote, yeah." I said there are some scattered clouds. But they're not thunderheads or anything. But the alarms, she said. Maybe it's a malfunction, quote. I hope not, seeing as working tornado alarms are important. I know, I said. But there isn't even a stiff breeze right now. It's just like it was when we came inside last night. Still and cool but calm. Should we go to the shelter for a little bit, just in case something is forming and we can't see it? Quote, I thought about it and it wasn't a bad idea. Yes, the kids would have their night interrupted and would have a hard time falling back to sleep. Yes, that lack of sleep might also make them little goblins in the morning. Yes, I was probably being overly cautious. But the downside of being wrong could be death. That was worse than kids being grumpy in the morning. I agreed, and sent him down into the shelter to wait it out, but decided to stay upstairs for now. Our phones worked for shit in the shelter, under the house. If I was going to find any new information, I would have to stay above ground for the time being. I helped everyone downstairs and closed up the shelter. I promised Cindy and kids I'd join them if things went sideways. I wouldn't doodle or try to get a good video. I tend to do, so I would be under the house as fast as they could. Say tornado. If you linger, I'll come grab your ass. Storm or no storm. Trust me, I know, I said, giving her a kiss on the forehead. Once my family was safely under the house, I went out to my porch. The alarms was still blaring, and it was obvious that my family wasn't the only one awake. Down the darkened street, I could see the porch lights pop on like man-made lightning bugs. What the hell is this? I heard someone say in the yard next to me. It was my neighbor Rick. Despite being on the tail end of the boomer generation, Rick seemed to swim against the tide. He was more rooted in General X than anything. Whenever we would shoot the shit outside, he constantly complained about the old people in our town, as if he was blind to his own receding hairline and wrinkles. Busted alarm, I offered what he yelled. I moved closer to him to avoid hollering into the night. Maybe a busted alarm, or someone accidentally scheduled the test for 3 a.m. instead of p.m. I don't know. Those tests are all controlled by computers. I don't think they'd make the kind of mistake. Besides, they would have shut him down by now, if it was an accident. There are some clouds out there. Think a storm is brewing, quote. Not according to the weather birds, Rick said. The weather birds were a local group of weather nerds and storm chasers he belonged to. There isn't much to do where we live, so you find hobbies wherever possible. They said a good sell was hanging out in North Texas, but it wasn't coming this way. I wonder what gives, I said. Government, said a voice to my right. This was my other neighbor, John. John was very much a boomer and proud of it. He was a former Marine and hated everything about modern living. As you can imagine, any of my kids' toys that ended up on his lawn, he instantly seized until I went and asked Nestle for it. Every time he'd lecture me, and I would apologize until he gave my kids Frisbee or whatever. He was exhausting, I mean. The weather alert system is run by the government, Rick said. Deep state government, Rick. The bad guys, John said with a sneer. They're up to something. Their master plan includes setting off a false tornado alarm in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. I asked one. This is in the middle of nowhere. Red basket of the country, and home to several nuclear missile launch sites. John barked too. The alarms are a way to set us off balance, to confuse us if we're focusing on the alarms. We're not watching what they're really doing, which is recast in a mix of confusion and amusement land clearance. They'll drive us out of here and reclaim our land. Why would they do that? I asked. John just laughed. Boy, you just don't get it, do you? Your whole generation is out to lunch. Actually, my whole generation has to work through our lunch breaks, I said, unable to resist the dig. They want to build the re-education center here. Turn real patriots into brain-dead automatons that will do whatever they tell us to do. Then the government can control us. That's when it gets really interesting. Where did you hear that recast? I do my own research, John said defensively. Wait, you're against government control now? Rick asked, doubling down. Always have been, he snapped. Didn't you work on the campaign for the ultra-conservative guy that ran in our district? The one that wanted to ban immigration and create a Muslim directory? I asked, knowing the answer already. Oh yeah, Rick chimed in, the anti-gay, anti-trans guy. Clay something Stonewater. And he's not anti-transgenderist. He's just a traditionalist. And those things have nothing in common with the kind of government control I'm talking about. The one that will strip normal people of their rights, their guns, their property. They want to turn us into pushovers so they can do just that. Normal people, I asked, pushing back on John's diatribe. You guys want to keep your head in the sand about where we are going as a people. Fine. But society can't take these kind of changes and not pay a consequence for them. If you let the rot creep in, it takes over. How does any of this connect to the tornado alarm? I said, feeling the exhaustion of the late night. And John's right-wing rambling set in. Clay warned us about the deep state. He said the stormtroopers would come at night and lock us up. I'm worried this might be the start of something big. I'll grant you this. If they wanted to ensure the citizens they rolled up wouldn't be armed, a tornado alarm in the middle of the night would be a way to do it, I said. John laughed. Speak for yourself, he said, raising his shirt to expose a handgun tucked into his pajama pants. What the fuck, man? I said. I'll never be caught off guard, he said with a smile. Old Pete and I go everywhere together. Let one of these stormtroopers come around here, I'll blast him where he stands. You both can thank me later. The screaming tornado alarms suddenly went quiet. You could hear the echo in your mind, but the typical night noises returned to the world outside our gray matter. Crickets reigned supreme again. We all looked at each other in delighted amazement. Yes, it wasn't stormtroopers after all, I said. Rick laughed. John didn't. Above us, we heard an eardrum-bursting boom. It was like a bomb went off above our heads. Only we hadn't seen anything streak by. That was a sonic boom, John said. Seconds later, we heard a different type of boom. Whatever had flown over us had exploded. You could just barely make out the orange flames in the dark clouds. Our Jesus tap dancing Christ, John said, removing his red cap and placing it over his heart. What the hell is that? I said, pointing up at the sky. Breaking through the clouds was a white parachute. It was drifting so violently from side to side that I feared it would tip over and send the occupant plunging to the earth. Whoever was strapped to the chute wasn't steering anything. They were dropping right towards our street. There was another sonic boom over our heads, quickly followed by another explosion. Seconds later, another white flower bloomed in the sky. Like their compatriot, they looked zoned out, on their southward descent. The first parachuting pilot showed no signs of slowing, and landed harder on the ground than they should have. As soon as their legs hit the pavement of the road, you could hear the sickening snap of both legs. That woke the pilot up. The man screamed so loud I was afraid he'd break glass. Rick had been a paramedic in his younger years, and ran over to the pilot to help in any way he could. The pilot frantically ripped his helmet and reached for his broken legs, but his harness wouldn't let him grab them. It was for the best. His legs had broken at the shin and were barely attached. "Hey man, I know it hurts, but stop thrashing around. You're going to make it worse, okay? We can save the legs, but you need to listen," Rick said in a more confident and serious tone than I had ever heard him. "We are all fucked," the pilot said, his eyes wide. "That thing isn't going to let any of us live. Just put a bullet into me. Shoot me, quote." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw John walk up. I was worried he would acquiesce to the pilot's request, but instead he smacked the guy across the face. The pilot's frantic motions and screaming stopped. "You're in the uniform, act like it." John said. He nodded. "A trick, let this man do his job, okay?" Quote the pilot. Still dazed, just nodded. I looked over at John and we locked eyes. I hated the dude, but that was pretty clutch. I gave him a nod and he returned the favor. Rick was able to unhatch the pilot from his ejector seat and lay him on the ground. He went to work making a splint as best he could. About a dozen people tried to call 911, but their phones didn't work. They couldn't find a signal. Suddenly the power in the entire neighborhood went out. We were standing in pitch black darkness when we heard the second pilot land on the street with another snap of their legs. The screams that followed echoed through the quiet neighborhood. "Paul," I heard a familiar voice call out. It was Cindy. She was standing with my children on the side of the house. I had doodled and she was true to her word. "Paul, what's going on?" Quote, "Hi." I never got to finish that thought. From above us came a bassy trumpet blast that did shatter glass. Everyone grabbed their ears and squatted to the ground, as if that would make it disappear. I felt my internal organs vibrating. It was unsettling. After the longest 10 seconds in my life, the trumpet blast stopped. I looked over at my kids and they were sobbing. Cindy did everything she could to hold them together. I ran over, my legs wobbly from the noise, and hugged them tightly. "Daddy, what's going on?" my son asked, sobbing. "I don't know," I said, deciding that honesty was better than not. "Is something coming for us?" my daughter said, fear rising in her voice. "No, baby." "I don't think so." I gave her a tight hug. My eyes looked up until they locked with Cindy's panic-stricken face. "I won't let anything happen to you." "Who are those guys?" my son said, pointing at the 2 wounded pilots. Pilots, where are their planes? Quote, a ball the size of a compact car came hurtling toward the ground. Everyone on the street screamed and ran for cover. The debris slammed into the Anderson home, 10 houses down, sending a shockwave that swept everyone off their feet. I stood in time to see a second ball, hurtling toward our neighborhood. I dove over my family and shielded him as the metal ball slammed into John's house. It instantly exploded, and flames started eating away the home. I lay on them until the dust from the explosion settled. Once I was sure there wasn't anything else raining down on us, I got to my feet. My vision was hazy from the dust in the air, but I had a clear view of the ball that destroyed John's house. It was one of the jets. Something in the clouds had crumbled up, a $500 million weapon of war, like it was a kid's paper airplane. "That thing isn't natural," the first pilot screamed. "This isn't the first attack." The second one yelled, "They'll come for you, all run. Run before they come after you." Quote, the night sky was, again, broken by the bone-rattling bass of that horn blowing. Again we all dropped and covered our ears again. The horn stopped, but echoed for 10 seconds before it finally dissipated. We all craned our necks, and were treated to an explosion of red, blue, green, and yellow lights illuminating the clouds. At first blush it looked random, but it wasn't. It was a pattern. The pattern repeated to more times, and then everything went dark. It was silent and calm again. All the sounds of the natural world rushed back to your ears. Crickets continued their symphonies, and a gentle breeze blew. It would be idyllic if it weren't for the raging house fires, panic-stricken pilots, and the bulled-up aircraft next to me. "Is that it?" I said out loud to the universe. I heard a rumbling coming down our street. My emotions couldn't take any more shock, but I was bracing for whatever the fuck was coming. I was ready to sprint and hide with my family, if I needed to. Soon the humming of dozens of engines filled our ears. The bright yellow headlights of the lead truck illuminated the street. There were dozens of pairs behind them. I was worried this was a foreign invading force, but relaxed when I saw an American flag on the side of the trucks. The stars and stripes on the carter of military vehicles put my mind at ease. For a second anyway. Then the inevitable question popped into my mind. Cindy beat me to the punch. "What the hell is the army doing here?" she asked. I don't know. The line of trucks came to a halt. The engines idle, and the noise drowned out the crickets. Even though it was dark, you could still see the exhaust puffing into the air. After a beat, the passenger side of the lead truck popped open, and a high-ranking army official exited the vehicle. He clutched a bullhorn in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other. Seeing the wounded pilots, he whispered something into his walkie-talkie. Seconds later, we heard the doors of an ambulance open, and men marching with medical gear to retrieve the pilots. Rick tried to help, but he was pushed aside. He didn't argue, just took a step back. The medical men stabbed the pilots with some sort of pain medication because they both stopped talking and slumped over in the stretches. Seconds later, they were placed in the back of an ambulance and gone from our sight. The army official looked at the gathered group of people and raised his bullhorn. In a loud and gruff voice, he spoke. "Many of you are probably wondering what happened here. It's my job to inform you that there has been an accident in the skies above your town. Two American pilots experienced a catastrophic failure, and their planes were destroyed. The United States Armed Forces will compensate everyone for this unfortunate error. If your house has been destroyed, please contact our intelligence agents. We will gather your information. Again, the United States Armed Forces apologizes for this event. Thank you." He lowered his bullhorn. What were they engaging with? Recast. The crowd around him suddenly found their courage and demanded answers. The official raised the bullhorn again. They did not encounter anything. The jet systems malfunctioned and crashed. That's bullshit, Rick yelled. I understand this is a lot to take in at once. But we are here to help you, the official said. This was a malfunction on the jets that caused the crash. I had heard enough bullshit. I took a few steps toward the official and pointed at the bored-up remains of the jet. Something crushed that fucking plane like it was a potato chip. It's in the shape of a ball, for God's sake. Quote, the pilots was screaming about. Something coming to kill us. What is that about? Rick said, his anger rising with the crowds. This group of neighbors and block party participants was rounding into an angry mob right before my eyes. They were in shock from the trauma. The official said, oftentimes pain will make you say things. No, it doesn't. Rick said, I worked in trauma hospitals my whole life. No one ever starts ranting about government conspiracies when they get hurt. What aren't you telling us? Quote, we are telling you the truth. I think he's lying, I screamed. The crowd cheered in agreement. There was palpable anger growing in the crowd. The official must have sensed it too, because he glanced back at the convoy of trucks and gave a curt nod. Suddenly every door opened, and full-armed soldiers got out and fell into formation behind him. You can't intimidate us, you can't force a lie onto us. We know what we saw, quote. He raised his bullhorn again. You are mistaken, sir. Hallucination is a side effect of exposure to the chemicals from the exploded jet. I recommend you all go into your homes and wait until our cleanup crews can ensure the spill is contained. At once every soldier flipped off their safeties. The message was clear. Go and forget this happened, or else. Despite the implied threat, something in me snapped. Instead of being coward, I took another step toward the soldiers. I picked up a rock and held it at the smashed jet. It rang off the metal. That's not a fucking hallucination. That's real, I said, pointing up at the sky. Whatever the fuck up there did, this was real too. We heard the noise, we saw the lights. It set off the tornado alarms. Quote, sir, I advise you and your family to return to your home. A gunshot rang out for a second. Everyone froze in place. I was worried the soldiers would open fire on us. I felt my resolve drain from me in that moment of impending death. I looked over and realized John had let old Pete join the conversation. The old Marine stood with a pissed-off skull on his face and his smoking gun aimed at the sky. What about my home? I looked over. It was surprised to see John walking toward the soldiers, as angry as I'd ever seen him. It's gone, as I said. The official started. John fired another shot in the air to silence him. The soldiers trained their guns on John. With a subtle hand gesture from the official, kept the bullets from flying. I gave everything for this country, for the Constitution, for freedom. I gave my youth fighting for this country, side to side with brothers in arms. I watched friends die. I knew the government was full of shit, but I always believed the military was a safeguard. But now this is the shit you're gonna pull on us. This is how you treat a fellow service member. Quote, thank you for your service. The official said, blow it out your ass. John retorted. The crowd went nuts. We all started yelling and massing. Cindy grabbed at me, but I turned and told her to take the kids inside. She opened her mouth to protest, but stopped when we locked eyes. It was righteous indignation. I had to see this, though. She grabbed my kids and rushed them back into the safety of the house. The official gave another signal, and 3 soldiers aimed their weapons into the air and fired off a few dozen rounds. The crowd went silent so quickly you could hear the shell casing hit the concrete. It sounded like a baby playing a xylophone. The crowd stopped advancing. The official ignored the rest of us and focused all his attention on John. I understand your frustration, but if you were a good soldier, you'd remember the chain of command, the official said, nodding to his rank designation on his shoulder. Good soldiers follow rank. You're a good soldier, right? Quote that quote, John. He paused and you could see him mulling the words over in his mind. This man had acquiesced to power his whole life hell. He had been a tool of it for most of his adult years. Now for the first time he was challenging it. John saw himself as an honorable man. A loyal man, not a rabble-rouser or shit-stirrer. We all waited for him to respond with bated breath. Then the rain started falling. Or I thought it was rain, but when it hit my arm, it burned. Each drop sizzle, as it hit our skin. A person in the crowd looked, and the drop hit them square in the eye. They screamed in pain and fell to the ground, clutching their face. It was like some kind of acid was falling on us. Oh shit, the official said, all of his bluster fleeing at once. They seeded the clouds. They're coming, everyone back inside the vehicles. Quote, all of the soldiers hustled back inside their trucks. The official gave the crowd a look and yelled, get inside now. Before he took off for the safety of his truck, I turned and ran for my house. As I did, a trumpet blast sent a shockwave that created a small earthquake. I tripped and fell, the falling rain stinging my exposed neck. My ears rang from the blast, but I wheeled myself into the house. As soon as I entered the door, I stripped off my clothes and tossed them outside. The rain had started to eat through the fabric. I wrapped myself in a throw blanket and rushed to the window to watch the scene unfolding in front of us. I was surprised to see John still standing out there. He hadn't moved from that spot. It was like the decision to go against his core beliefs had caused a malfunction in his brain. As he had aged, his beliefs had curdled into conspiracy. The force he thought was a bulwark against his dreaded deep state now seemed to be working in concert with it. It was too much for him to bear. Even with the prodding of acid rain, John didn't move. He stood there and let the rain eat him away, piece by piece. He didn't even scream as his skin sloughed off his body. Instead, he raised old Pete to his temple and pulled the trigger. I slammed the blind shut and turned away. Reality had broken through. We were in real danger. I grabbed my family and went to the back of the house. We'd ride out whatever was happening and pray it didn't get worse. My kids asked me to explain what was going on, but I didn't find an answer that wouldn't make things worse. I instead hugged them tight and told them I love them. All we could hear outside was the rain, or whatever it actually was, falling on the roof. I prayed it wouldn't eat through the shingles. I knew there was probably a bee's hive worth of activity going on outside, with the military there. Still, my rational brain had returned to me. I no longer cared about anything but surviving the night. We stayed that way for 2 hours. At some point the adrenaline wore off, and the 3 of them fell asleep. I couldn't though, because my mind was still reeling. But more than that, I felt the energy around me shift. I felt my mind start to slip. I've written all this down because I think something is messing with my mind, and I wanted to share my story in case I go crazy or something. I wanted to make sure I got the details just right, in case my brain is liquefying or something. I don't know what's waiting for us tomorrow morning, but I'm not sure I'll even make it until then. As soon as I got inside, I started feeling a tickling sensation down my arms and legs. It's like someone was dragging their fingernails down my skin. I think this has to do with that rain, because no one else in my house mentioned feeling that. The rain never fell on them. In the last 10 or so minutes, I've started noticing moving black shadows in the corners of my vision. When I look at the figures, they disappear. But they return, they always return. I can sense them watching me. I don't know what they are or what they want, but I'm sure they're not here for a cup of coffee. I can feel my eyes growing heavy, but I'm afraid to sleep. I'm worried they'll come for me then. I'm so scared I'll end up like John. I'm feeling my strength drain from me. I'm drifting now, powering down. I see them emerging from the shadows. Oh God,